In 2019, I decided to stop making stupid reviews to make higher quality stupid reviews instead. The first game that I would do a serious deep dive on would be the black sheep of the Pac Man series, Pac Man World Re. To recap, the game had okay, but albeit simple platforming, and unfortunately had a quite heavy emphasis on the combat, which it didn't do that well. There was also voice acting, and the game was quite funny and well written, but it was a heavy departure from the usual tone and feeling of the franchise up to this point.
I always intended to go back to the Pac Man World games, it's just a matter of when. I got a million other games I gotta do.
In June 2022, we got a partner Nintendo Direct, which basically meant Nintendo had nothing to announce. Except we found out later they did. Anyways, one of the biggest announcements of the presentation was that the first Pac Man World game was getting a remake on modern consoles, named Pac Man World Re-Pac. This name is stupid. The remake itself looks really good though, and thus, since I eventually want to review Pac Man World 1 and the remake, I gotta connect the dots here and review the game that I missed along the way.
And listen, some people might sit here and think that I'm reviewing Pac Man World 2 just because of the algorithm and the Pac Man hype, and I just want to assure you all right now that I would never do that.
So here we are, Pac Man World 2. This game was developed by Namco Home Tech and released in the ye old days of 2002. There really isn't much about this game's development history out there, but if you think about why it exists logically, it makes sense. In those days, game companies actually released sequels to their products instead of just having one every 7 years or just making DLC. So Pac Man World 1 was a great game and it sold well. So bam, 2 years later, here you go, another one. You're welcome. It was a crazy time for society. I think the simple development represents the simplicity of the product. When it comes to Pac Man World 3, obviously what came of it was kind of a dumpster fire, so there's a lot to say and a lot to answer. Pac Man World 2, on the other hand, is the type of game that was extremely common at the time. The N64 and PS1 era specifically were known for pumping out 3D platformers like nobody's business. There were dozens of these games, and for good reason. It was a new medium, and developers needed to experiment with the formulas. When the 6th generation came around, it was less about inventing this genre and more about perfecting it, polishing it up, and really pushing the technology the same way that the Super Nintendo and Genesis did for the side-scrollers after the NES. And then the 7th generation got rid of everything and everything was just a shooter. We need to go back in time. So what we have here is what you'd expect. A platformer, but better. You jump, you bounce off of platforms, and of course there are lots and lots of collectibles. There is a story in this game too, although it's quite simple and boring. My personal favorite type of story for these games, it's Pac-Man, okay? It's Pac-Man. You don't need to have this guy time traveling or looking for the Holy Grail or redesigned to be a soldier meant for war or talking to genies or giving the character a goddamn gun. You're just a simple, unembellished yellow ball. You like food, you jump, there's some ghosts, but apparently these types of games are just too hard to make these days. Yes, we got this guy, the Pac Professor or whatever, who sets up the game for us. The ghosts, Inky, Blinky, and Clyde, under the control of a more powerful ghost known as Spooky, have stolen the golden fruits from the center tree in Pac-Land, and thus you're sent off to find the fruits and restore order to the Pac village. So as stated, I like the story. It doesn't try to be something it isn't, but it has charm and even builds up a bit of lore for the Pac-Man universe. The PCU. The first area, the Pac Village, serves as a hub world of sorts. Here we also learn the basics. Just like in the original Pac-Man, there are Pac pellets just about everywhere, and even power pellets that let you eat the ghosts. You won't be able to defeat them without it. By running around the town, we also learn about the fruits and collectibles. You see, each level has a lot of collectibles that you're tasked with getting if you want, visualized with a checklist. Even the Pac pellets, which there can be hundreds of in a given level, are documented collectibles. My God. One of my favorite things about the fruits from a game design perspective is that they aren't just basic collectibles, although they mostly are. Sometimes you'll use a fruit kind of like a key. Throughout the game, there will be chests that require you to get all the, say, melons up to that point, in order to create a bouncy pad that you can use to progress. Often this will be pretty easy to get, whether it's right in your face or an enemy that you need to backtrack maybe a little bit for, so it's never too punishing. It means there's at least some reason to consider grabbing the fruits if you aren't interested in going for 100%. Also throughout the levels are the tokens. These are actually a really beneficial collectible. Depending on the number you collect, they let you play older Pac-Man games in an in-game arcade, ending at 180 where you can play Miss Pac-Man. So I'm not like a huge Pac-Man nerd. I kind of know about the controversy with ACT games, and here I thought in 2015 the worst thing they would ever do was make the ACT game Sega Genesis. This is interesting to me because if they ever remake this game, yeah, what are they gonna do to circumvent this? Plus she's in World 3, so I guess the Pac Man World 3 remake is out the window. It probably already was though. But at least with World 2, more likely than not, there's probably gonna be a remake of this game. It sold better than one, so Namco, start thinking about what you're gonna do, alright? Give us Pac-Man VR. Also with the tokens, you could unlock a jukebox to listen to the game's soundtrack, and a museum where you can take a gander at the concept art for this game. I think these are overall really nice incentives to collect the tokens. Keep in mind that there are only 189 of them, and the final reward, Miss Pac-Man, is 180, so you really gotta work for the tokens. Each level gives you an additional token for getting every single collectible inside of it. Which, like, this is kind of a mixed bag. On one hand, it's really nice that the game rewards you with something substantial for going out of your way to mostly complete it. Looking at something like Mario, in Sunshine, you kind of just get blue coins, they give you a postcard, or in 64, you get Yoshi. It's always something, like, kind of cute, but underwhelming. As a result, in this game, giving the player additional games inside of their game is a really great way to extend the lifespan of Pac Man World 2, and I bet as a result, people would continue to pop in their disc for months and months to come after they beat the game. It's a genuine replay value. But like, okay, I gotta be honest, guys, I really do like collectathons, but this is a lot of stuff to collect. On the surface, it's not drastically different from the games you would see in the N64 era, but at least for me, I found it very difficult to both play these levels and focus on collecting all the fruits and pellets at the same time. So at least for my casual playthrough, I kind of just didn't bother. I might go back at some point, but I really did find this to be a little bit overwhelming. And this is from a guy who got 900 Koroks in Breath of the Wild.
I thought about it more, like, why don't I enjoy collecting in this game? And I really think the issue I have with this system is that once you enter a level, you have to get everything in one perfect go-around, which is ridiculous.
To make matters worse, there are some levels that don't allow backtracking and some where you're constantly moving forward, so you have to play really well in order to get everything you need. I think if you could collect some fruits on a first go-around and then on a second go-around just focus on the ones you missed, this system wouldn't be as difficult or challenging. And that's how a lot of these games function. These games let you collect and explore at your own pace, which is why I did enjoy the Koroks in Breath of the Wild, or something like the pigeons in GTA 4. It's stress-free and at your leisure, but not only is getting every damn item in one swoop just unnecessarily difficult, you gotta remember, it's not just the fruits. There's also the ridiculous amount of pack dots you have to collect. If you miss a jump in an auto-scroller, well, that's a reset. But even on normal levels, the arcs are not designed well for Pac-Man's jump. It's not seamless to get the pack pellets, and the hitboxes aren't very lenient either. There's not a lot of magnetism here. Something like the studs in Lego City are a lot more forgiving. But you know what? At least you don't have to get every single one of those. For those who like those types of challenges, you might have some fun with it, but it's certainly not going to be for everyone, and it wasn't for me. If this is your first playthrough, my advice would be to just kind of not worry about these. Besides unlocking some bonuses, they don't do anything. Like if you want to play Miss Pac-Man, I got some news for you. You can buy it anywhere nowadays. In 2002, certainly, being able to play these games and see the concept art was a lot more substantial, but with the advent of the internet, it's basically useless. Actually, one thing they could have done is replicate what Super Mario 3D World did. In that game, there are 3 green stars in each level. You don't have to get all of them, they are presented to you as optional, but every once in a while, something like a castle will be blocked off by a certain number of green stars. This encourages the player to at least get some of them. It's certainly better than an all or nothing approach, because in Pac Man World 2, you either care about the collectibles to get 100% and the tokens, or you skip all of them, because besides the occasional treasure chest you need to move, they do nothing. You also get another token by going back into a level and doing its time trial. These remove the fruits, I believe, so it's solely about trying to be quick. It's a nice little bonus, but not something I particularly cared for, although this is kind of an easier way to get the tokens, I think. Throughout the levels, you'll find a Galaxian just sitting around. These will take you to an original Pac Man maze. These are quite different from the OG game in the sense that you don't see the whole map. It's pretty closed in on you only. I find this to be an interesting departure, and almost makes you want to play a bit more strategically. It's kind of anxiety-inducing, like, oh god, a ghost can be around the corner at any time and I'd have no idea. My favorite thing about these mazes is that they visually look different depending on what level level you're in, which is a nice spin on the classic arcade game where level 1 was blue and black, level 2 was blue and black, level 3 was blue and black. However, one issue I had is that it honestly feels like the controls are a bit off. I can never move my pack the direction I always wanted. I think this is because of the GameCube control stick. It just doesn't work very well with grid-based movement, and unfortunately, the D-pad, which is really small, isn't much better. I should mention this game was released on PlayStation 2 and the OG Xbox, where both have D-pads that don't feel like my thumb presses all 4 directions at once, so I imagine the mazes are a lot better there. So this isn't really an actual criticism with the game, it's probably just a matter of me having big hands and the GameCube. I would say Pac Man controls pretty well overall. You have a pretty diverse and interesting moveset, although it's quite simple by the same token. Get it? Token? One of the most addicting is the butt bounce, as this game calls it. This can be used to defeat enemies, but also activate switches and breaks open boxes. You have a rev roll, which helps you gain a ton of speed from a fixed position and blast off. This is a Sonic move, it's called the Spin Dash. The rev roll helps you get up ramps, but it's also required to charge up certain platforms throughout the game to move them, and also make jumps off of ramps. Unfortunately, I would say mastering the rev roll distances, especially if it's your first go-around, is really hard to do. I died quite a bit. You can stop your speed by pressing A in the air, but overall, judging the trajectory of Pac Man wasn't always the easiest. Whenever I saw a ramp, I felt like I was taking a leap of faith. Maybe if I played the game a few more times, I would get used to it, but starting off, it was not easy for me. Just like in the air, on the ground, you can stop your rev roll at any point with an A button press. This is an absolute necessity to master, and really good in general to have in your arsenal. The last move I can think of is a jump kick by pressing B in the air, which is actually pretty fun to do, but kind of hard to judge where you're exactly hitting. Sometimes in the air, you just kind of do it and miss, and that really sucks for the collectibles in the level. That's another reset. It's not a huge issue, definitely not the easiest thing in the world to time out. I do appreciate how this game requires you to master the arsenal of moves. There aren't a ton of moves, but the ones you do have, the game wants you to practice and get skilled at. The final fight against Spooky, for instance, is solely done with the jump kick, and for the platforms that move with the rev roll, if you don't press A to leave it, then you wouldn't be able to do it at all, requiring the player to pick up on a somewhat forgotten feature on a first run. I also really like the combat for this game, as in there is no combat. Like Pac Man World 3 had so much punching, whereas here, if you do fight a bunch of enemies, you can just butt bounce a bunch of them in a row, which feels so much more Pac-Man. Sure, it's a bit dumb, but it's fun. Pac-Man also has a ledge grab. I don't know if you would consider this a move, per se, but it's used quite often. It's actually quite a lifesaver. Oftentimes you'll use it to shimmy, although it is pretty sluggish. If you ledge grab on a falling platform, just forget it, you're dead. It sucks because it gives you the illusion you could save yourself, but no, it's over. There are 2 power-ups in this game, 3 if you count the power pellet, although overall power-ups aren't used super often. There's the chrome power-up, making you stronger and letting you walk through lava, or at least it makes it more like quicksand, I don't know. There's also the shrink pellet, which this is a cool idea, sure, but it's basically never used. I actually forgot this existed until doing research for this script, and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that did happen. Unfortunately, I think the biggest issue I had with Pac Man World 2 is its level design. I kind of hate to say this because I know I'm kind of talking negatively about a game people love, and I do think it's overall a good game, but I think the level design is just way too hit or miss for its own good. There are some levels that hold up. I think a lot of the earliest levels are designed very well when the difficulty curve is at its lowest, and the final world as well was pretty creative and entertaining. For a bit, once this game gets to the lava section, I seriously feel like there's a lot that goes wrong. And I think for a platformer, there's a decent amount of things that are really cryptic. Take Magma Opus, for example. I got super trapped in a cavern sort of area, which honestly looked like a dead end. Here you can get an iron pellet, which lets you walk on the lava, but at least on a first glance, it doesn't seem like you can go anywhere. This also doesn't respawn. Later, I found out you could if you just walk to the end, so this route might seem kind of stupid, but it's my genuine experience, so I'm just gonna share it how I feel it. It certainly doesn't look or feel like you can, especially if you mess around with the iron pellet too much and lose your invincibility. The platforms were also just out of reach, and the one bouncy pad that exists here bounces you back to the dead end. I messed around for close to an hour trying to figure out the solution here. Well, my conclusion was I needed a rev roll off of this bouncy pad, which didn't come to my head. Seeing the visual of a target indicated this platform's sole use would be to, well, jump on it. It's very floaty in the air too. It doesn't feel like a very stable platform. Even when I figured all of that out, getting a consistent rev roll to the platforms is very difficult. I died quite often actually, so this section was both kind of cryptic and frustrating. Sometimes I would ledge grab on, but as we established earlier, the pillars would move so quick that it would just be a death. What I would have liked in this situation to know to walk on the lava would be some signs, some pack pellets maybe, just something to indicate that this wasn't an empty abyss. Because of the platforms here, I genuinely thought those were the solution, and the target being shaped like a ramp would trick me into thinking I needed to do something with that when I figured it out. From a game design perspective, those have your attention, and why wouldn't I try to do those instead of just walking past the platforms? This level also concludes with a slide section, which really sucks. The ending of it specifically has an extremely precise portion of it. I think what irritates me the most is it kinda seems like you can just sequence break it by skipping the narrow slide section, and honestly that would be, even if unintended, cute level design, something the likes of the slide skip in Mario 64. Obviously not what the developers intended, but upon discovering it, you as a player feels rewarded and satisfied finding your own ways to pass a challenge. But you just kinda die, and it doesn't make sense. It goes against your senses since normally you can drop to anywhere you see in this game. Thinking about it now, even the beginning of this level really frustrated me. The knockback this giant enemy causes with the balls he shoots is basically impossible to avoid. Even with the iron pellet, you just kinda need to get lucky. Yeah, Magma Opus is like really bad, and the title is very not accurate. As stated, you need to be super precise in the slide portion. I somehow BS'd it at 0 lives, but if I didn't get so lucky, well, I'd be screwed and would have to start the 20-minute level at the very start. That's because Pac Man World 2 uses a life system. There are checkpoints, and somewhat frequent ones at that, but if you do game over in a level, well, you gotta start over. I think that's mostly fair, especially for the era, and there are lots of lives you can get throughout the game. It's not like it starts you over at the world itself or anything, so it's workable, but a little antiquated. Namco, if you guys make a remake, just cut this, please. Another section named Night Crawling, I felt had one moment which was like extremely cryptic. There were like 5 bouncy pads, right? And I'm sitting here trying to calculate with like geometry and logic, which one's gonna get me to the other side? Well, the one on the far right just doesn't make it. I looked it up. The solution is to ignore all of that. You're supposed to just do a rev roll from the top of this wall. I'm sorry, but like, what? Why'd you put so many bouncy pads then? It doesn't even feel like you're supposed to be on this wall. There are some things this game wants you to do that just feels like a sequence break or like a cheat or something. I think moments like this really kill a lot of momentum for the game for me, because I'll be playing, enjoying the platforming, and suddenly I'm trapped and don't know how to progress without looking it up online. But while some portions let you do what essentially are sequence breaks, some levels take away the ability to come up with your choice to do it. The lack of consistency feels like a complete restriction for the player, and from a game design perspective, fails to give the game a significant unity. Now, confusing moments aside, it's worth talking about how this game is really difficult, and mainly fairly so. Usually if you die, it's your fault. If this is your first playthrough, you're going to be dying a bunch. Just get used to it. It's important to stay stocked up on lives, which, as I said, there are some throughout the worlds, of course, or you can do what I did, which is go down Blade Mountain like 100 times, because there's something like 10 lives here, and I think there are better life grinding spots actually, but this is just the one I did. Pac Man World 2's level design is actually really varied, and it can lead to some serious high points in this adventure. When the game does do something different and it's genuinely cool, it's actually really memorable. For instance, there's a snowboarding section and there's an Indiana Jones type of part with like a snowball, which, yeah, it's a bit annoying not being able to see ahead, but I at least appreciated the variety. Haunted Boardwalk is typically highly praised. I personally didn't like this level very much. It felt like the bridges would always be fighting me, and ledge grabs would be their usual death sentence, but I think objectively is fine and something I'd at least like to shout out. One of my absolute favorites in this entire game is the final level, Ghost Bayou, which is basically a giant maze with little challenges you have to do throughout, such as defeating a bunch of enemies within a time limit, something I appreciate. Lots of video games I've played don't always do something unique towards the end, so it's nice to see the developers putting heart and soul throughout the entire product. I can tell the developers seriously cared. Although one thing with Ghost Bayou is it's really dark. You might have to turn up your TV screen to see anything, which always kind of annoys me in these games.
Overall, the unique concepts are kind of a double-edged sword, because I love the moments that are good and unique. I really do. but sometimes this game does something different, and I hate it. Please go back to being a platformer.
The entirety of the water section in this game gives me that vibe. Like, I don't know, I really don't know the consensus on these, but do people enjoy this? Basically, instead of platforming, you swim forward kind of like a dolphin. You can speed up and break boxes, but that's pretty much all you can do, and it's not fun, and it goes on what feels like an eternity. To make matters worse, this level is basically just repeated twice. The second level's called Shark Attack, and I was like, oh boy, it's Shark Week, we're gonna see some sharks. I didn't see any differences. There was like one shark. I think these sections also suck because they really aren't unique visually. I mean, don't get me wrong, this game in general can be a bit bland at times. It's your typical grass, water, lava, ice, spooky area shenanigans, kind of like a new Super Mario Brothers game or something. But regardless, most of the time, I think the levels still retain a specific charm to them, even if the themes themselves are boring. They're still creative and fun. For instance, the ghosts in the ice world have little beanies. Ah, that's so cute. But the water levels specifically look like they took inspiration from Finding Nemo or Little Mermaid or something. In fact, I think just about any licensed character could be here. Overall, the water levels aren't horrible, it's playable. It's not necessarily fun or memorable. Okay, I take it back. It's like a little memorable, just not in a good way. The water section then proceeds to a 7-minute slog where you pilot a submarine. Okay, I try to be nice about the previous water levels. I'm just gonna be a jerk here. This game drew first blood, not me, okay? This section sucks. I think mainly because of the length. The level drags on and on and on like I've just never seen before. It's like Desert Bus. I was sitting in a voice chat when I was playing this level. My friends and I were just laughing at how ridiculous this was. This level would just never end. It's the goddamn Godfather trilogy. On top of that though, it's like, is this really necessary in a Pac-Man game? You're not really playing as Pac-Man. Excuse me, the submarine is yellow? Yeah, you know what, sit down. This could have been like any computer game in the 2000s. Or a Beatles song. Basically, you get missiles 6 at a time, which you can spam in short bursts before needing to recharge. Occasionally, you get a super bomb that blows everything on screen. This is actually super satisfying, and I found myself mostly using this strategically. You can shoot the spiky balls in midair, some of which spawn fruits and health, and the ghosts do appear in some form at least, which are one of your main obstacles as well. Thankfully, there are checkpoints, but it still doesn't change the fact that you basically do nothing of substance for 7 minutes here. The boss is more of the same, requiring you to fire missiles at each of the submarine's jets. You know, I just didn't like this whole water world at all. It feels extremely out of place with the rest of the game. It's really sluggish. Thankfully, the rest of the game onward has nothing like this. It honestly feels like this was added last minute as filler or something. While the levels may be difficult, they are nothing compared to some of the bosses in this game. The first is Blinky's fight, which, you know what, it's fine. It's just a stupid frog, you know what to attack, we're all good here. Inky's fight, also fine. Nothing really negative to say about this one either. Pinky's fight is where we start having problems. I spent so much time just messing around with this boss, not knowing what to do. The attack patterns weren't really obvious. Well, apparently, you're supposed to just revel into her. Dude, there are like fang-like spikes right at the front, so I just figured that wasn't a good idea, but nope.
It's fine. They'll lock me in a goddamn therapy box as I repeat that over and over. They ask me, where did it all go wrong for you, Jeff? When was the moment in time that you freaking snapped?
I lost my goddamn freaking mind at the Clyde fight. Holy smackaroos, this fight probably made me angrier than anything I've played in a long time. Or at least in 2 months, I don't know, it's been a painful summer. The Clyde fight. Wait, they named the wrong ghost Clyde. Well, that's 2 games that messed this up. I'm gonna guess it started here as a translation error or like a colorblind screw up, and then in Pac Man World 3 they just kept it to be consistent. But no, I looked it up further, and apparently this is a recurring issue throughout the whole franchise. Maybe they can't make up their mind. I guess on paper it doesn't matter that much. I don't know, maybe Namco executives roll a dice every day. Oh, it rolled a 3. Today is Clyde Day, everyone. Anyways, this boss is probably the most difficult part of the entire game. Clyde fires so many projectiles at you, you just never stand a chance. This happens during Pinky as well, but it's a bit slower and a bit easier to predict. Clyde shoots these like snowballs so quickly, and there's no clear pattern on where his projectiles are gonna go. But to make matters worse, there's little fires that spawn on the floor that you have to dodge as well. Honestly, my brain doesn't even register these half of the time because they don't look significant. Sometimes these will even spawn on the ramps that you need to jump off of, so you either have to take a hit or miss a whole cycle. Okay, having to rev roll between platforms is really frustrating because often you can overshoot and undershoot it and lose a life. I had a problem with both Clyde and Pinky where they want you to rev roll into them to do a damage, but when there's a bottomless pit under you, sometimes you bounce off of them and die. It's really jank and honestly just not fair. In the last phase of this fight, I don't know what happened, but his hitbox just entirely changed. Before, if you bounced on him, you would do a little damage with just one bounce. I don't know if they changed this to be random at the end or I was just hitting the wrong part, but in the last phase, sometimes this guy would just not take damage no matter how many butt bounces I did, and this is very problematic because if you do bounce off of him, you want to be able to know it instantly. That way, you can pivot back to land. But when it's random and it takes however many hits it feels like, guess what? You're not prepared when it actually happens, and uh-oh, you're dead. Yup, that was fair. Luckily, with boss fights at least, there are checkpoints. So when you do 2 hits, when you die the next time, the damage will still be saved. So my advice is to go to Blade Mountain or wherever and go grind some lives. And theoretically, you should be able to beat the boss no matter what, as long as you have the free time. But it doesn't change the fact that these bosses are still so time consuming. Like, the Clyde boss took me an hour, at least. But even if it wasn't for the deaths, this would still be like a 5-minute plus long boss. There's so much waiting around and praying, and it just doesn't work, man. I'm sorry. Bosses in video games should not be something you dread doing. I think challenge itself is fine, but the challenge, at least with Clyde, is ridiculous. I'm sorry, it just is. If it wasn't for the glitches, I would not be talking about it to this length, but the fact that there's so many jank things that can happen on top of being pelted with a million projectiles at once, it's a low point of the game for me, and was honestly really miserable. And you know what? This is my problem with Pac Man World 2 as a whole. It's really close to being good, and I know a lot of people are going to be mad at me for my opinions in this video, but I just don't think it's as good as people make it out to be. It's nowhere near a bad product. There are plenty of high points, plenty of good, if not great levels, and a great presentation. But to the side of that, what I feel like people don't mention enough is the fundamentally broken or bad game design littered throughout. And if it's not bad, it can be quite antiquated. The Clyde fight is brutal, and there's just some levels that aren't good or don't hold up. Not to mention the collectible system, which is really not something casual players can even think about while playing. Like, if you want to say this game is good besides, oh, the water portion, that's still a big part of the game. That's not just one level, it's 4, and 4 long levels at that. If you want to say, well, the lava levels are kind of hard and the Clyde fight is bad too, that's another few levels you're looking at. And that's not to mention the punishingly difficult collectible system, the camera that's always fighting you, and while this game has some polish on it, it just doesn't hold up that well.
Like, I'm gonna be honest for a second here. Writing this review really depressed me, okay, because this game is beloved. It's really nostalgic for a lot of people, including me, and critically acclaimed on the internet. I'm gonna let a lot of people down with this, but I can't just sit here, play the game, write the review, and then like lie about my opinion. I gotta be honest, and unfortunately, I don't have the popular opinion when it comes to this game. It's not a bad game, I would still call it good, but as the video title says, it's probably just not as good as you remember it being.
And assuming you haven't clicked off this video yet or hate me, I want to say that sometimes accepting a game you like is flawed is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I had this experience with a varied game in this series. I grew up a ton with Pac Man World 3. I genuinely thought it was a great game most of my childhood into my teen years. I had this experience with Pikmin 2. I thought it was the best game in the series before my retrospective, until I realized it's good but quite flawed. I want to stress one time that I don't think it's bad. It's not a masterpiece though, and just nowhere near the rank people put it at it. People treat this game like Super Mario 64 2 or something, and I think that's just entirely disingenuous. But hey, the ending is pretty good. The fight against Spooky is a high point in the game and easily my favorite boss. And I think while it's challenging in a more fun trial and error way. The projectiles are spaced out nicely and are actually dodgeable, the obstacles are genuinely easier to avoid while still being fun, and there's easily obtainable health frequently. This is is helping the player out in a good way. Spooky even puts you under a spell from time to time that makes you dizzy and reverses your controls. It's a charming fight and a really good level to end the game on. It's not easy, but it's something you grow as a player to get good at. This is good challenge, and it's good game design. You beat Spooky, Pac-Land is restored, and you see a collection of Pac-Mans dancing. Wait, is that a pack dog? If you want more positives, I have to say that this game's presentation is one of my favorites in this generation of games. Now sure, it looks bad today, but this was 2002. I think I can forgive a bad texture here or there. What matters to me is that Pac-Man is extremely expressive. Look at this guy, he stole the logo. Someone call the police. He has a plethora of visible, charming animations. When he eats something, his mouth moves, and the game developers were quite faithful to the original source material. When Pac-Man eats a ghost with the power pellet, the whole game freezes, which sounds bad, but I actually really love it. There's so many moments in this game that just make me smile. I love the ghosts. They're so cheesy and simple, but done so well. Spooky is the type of villain that's obviously bad for Pac-Land, but you can't help but enjoy. It has that TTYD Bowser type of feel. I also really love the world map for this game. It's extremely linear, sure, but at the least it reminds me of Super Mario World, and it's fun to traverse through with lots of early 2000s charm. And the music, the music's outstanding. It goes for a motif approach, mostly early on at least, meaning a lot of the songs have a similar note repetition. While this can be pretty repetitive, it's far from abnormal. Movies and their soundtracks do this all the time, and while this game is far from a movie, I think it gives Pac Man World 2 its own defined personality and really makes it feel like an adventure. Don't lie, this is half of your nostalgia for this game, okay? The instrumentation is genuinely well done too. I don't think this is like the best video game soundtrack or anything, but like the rest of the game, there is some genuine effort and passion put in here. I specifically like how each level has its own song, something that many platformers, even Mario and Sonic, could have really benefited from. This genuinely gives each level its own feel and its own placement in the game. Every level feels like in some form it belongs.
So like, I could end things here, it'd be a fine video length, all that stuff. But we still got ground to cover. I'm gonna let an old friend take this one, so take it away, Mr. Shovelware.
Hello, I'm Mr. Shovelware. I'm pretty much just JeffCompass, but I talk specifically about bad games. And the original Pac Man World 2, it's fine. But the GBA version is so bad that I cannot believe it exists.
So yeah, this is fairly typical of games in this era. They always, and I mean always, would get GBA ports. Developers would walk to the literal end of the earth to produce a Game Boy Advance version of the game. They put everything on here. The first Pac Man World got a GBA version, so I guess it only made sense for the developers to ship out a World 2 port. Weirdly enough though, this game came out in 2005, 3 years after the console version and close to Pac Man World 3. My only guess for this is that they saw Pac Man World 3 would be getting versions on every console besides the GBA, even getting a DS port, so they just kind of panicked and threw Pac Man World 2 on here to have something for like the holidays, and it wasn't super uncommon for GBA ports to come out later rather than sooner. Jet Set Radio Advanced was the same sort of thing. So here it is. Here's Pac Man World 2 on GBA.
Oh god, that is some compressed audio, and I thought the at-game Sega Genesis was bad.
Okay, look, I know it's a GBA game. I get it, okay? I get it. It doesn't change the fact that the music in this game literally makes me want to die. The story is still here, using compressed screen caps and captions from the console version, which is fair enough. Alright, enough messing around, let's see how it plays. Off the bat, we see that Pac Village has been recreated. Except you can't go through the doors, which pisses me off because it looks like you can. Oh, come on! I'm gonna be honest, they probably could have just cut this whole level. Like, I think they were just trying to be really faithful to the console version, but if you really think about it, it has no reason to exist here. At least with the console version, you had areas to go to, you have some NPCs and a lot more to collect. You even have some mini tutorials such as eating ghosts. But here, there's like 3 fruits and nothing else. All the moves are here. You can butt bounce and rev roll, ledge grab, you can even kick flip, although to be honest, I don't remember any instances where you really do this. One thing that sucks is that while the ghosts are present, you don't get that gratifying pause when you eat one. This kind of trips me up after playing the console version, honestly, because I keep expecting a pause. Some consistency would have gone a long way. Pac Man World 2 has a password system. You get one after each level. It's kind of weird because the password screen is missing a bunch of the alphabet. I really hate the tutorial level, actually. I found it harder than a lot of the levels in this game, if I'm being honest. They have all these signs to teach you the game, which, you know what, fair enough. The problem is, though, if you backtrack past it, which you will have to, oftentimes it forces you to read the text box again, even if it's now irrelevant. This reminds me of the Ben 10 game on Hyperscan. It's only a problem in this level mainly, but I spent like an hour trying to beat this level, so it's probably just fresh on the mind. Sometimes you can literally die and still read the text box, which feels like a slap in the face. jerks. I will say graphically, this game looks pretty good. The sprite work is nice, and the backgrounds are nice and colorful. It's hard to judge what you can jump on and what you can't though.
That's not a platform?
Like, this is debatable, I guess. I asked Twitter and Discord because I was honestly unsure if I had the right to be mad about this. Some people pointed out that even if it looks like a platform, you should be able to make the next jump. And some said they would distinguish it as a foreground object, although a lot of people did agree with me, at least in some capacity. I personally would die here frequently. Even when I knew it wasn't a platform, I just had this, like, intuition to do it. And I think it's because it's bold and nothing else is, besides, like, the foreground, as I mentioned. But regardless of this instance, because this is a 2.5D type of game, there are platforms that you legitimately will fail and fail and fail to jump on. It's like that Indiana Jones NES game. Give me a damn break. That perception, no way around it, is a huge issue in Pac Man World 2. Oftentimes, it'll look like you can make jumps you can't. Sometimes you phase through fruits. It's honestly really frustrating, but what makes all of this so much worse is the perplexingly bad controls. Jumps just don't feel very good. It often feels like you barely make them. You can get a little more height with the butt bounce, but for some reason, I was never able to string these together very well, so I didn't want to always use it. If you don't time it perfectly, Pac-Man just kind of does a rolling animation instead. I don't know, guys, the game design is just really irritating. At one point, I got to the end of a section, but didn't know what to do. The only thing drawing the player's attention at this point is a giant shiny button, so I hit it to spawn a lemon. I thought hitting the box that unlocks with this lemon, and yes, these boxes returned from the console game, would be what I needed to do to continue. So I backtrack all the way back with some very peculiar jumps to get that stupid lemon. Then we backtrack again to get back to the lemon box. It's only a goddamn orange. So it turns out you're supposed to avoid all of that and just go right. Now tell me, is that a trap or what? Why wouldn't the player assume to just hit the shiny button? Up to this point, it's not established that you can just go right to continue. Why'd they have to trick me?
Why not have a sign or something that just points right? Why make it a trick? This is one of those things that's like arguably my fault. But still, there was a bouncy pad, and getting that lemon was not easy.
It's not like this is the console games where you get a token. Here, you have even less reason to collect stuff, unless you want to do it for score. I'm sorry, grand score. Excuse me, your royal highness. Some of the jumps that this game wants you to make are excruciating. These ramps come from hell. They really don't make any sense. The game wants you to butt bounce down them, which can work with enough trial and error, but as I said earlier, I think sometimes the issue is you just don't get a butt bounce when you need one, and instead you go into the rolling animation. The rolling animation can actually happen at the edge of cliffs too sometimes, meaning you just outright die. So it's not an isolated incident either. The only consistent way I was able to make it over was tiptoeing to the edge and rev rolling, but with that, you're often just going to get too much speed and overshoot it. There's no way around it. You're going to lose your lives and game over in this game. One good thing is that the checkpoints are extremely plentiful. When I mean plentiful, I mean every platform after you die. While this is good in concept, sometimes you get placed on the very edge of a platform.
Meaning if you're like holding a direction right after you die, like because you want another chance, forget it, you're dead.
I think what's funny is the treetops level right after is a ton easier than the literal tutorial level. And looking at this, it's again a pretty faithful recreation of the console game. In fact, the whole game is, but funnily enough, they cut the whole water section out. You know what, I'm actually going to list that as a positive change. Congrats, you got something Pac Man World 2 on GBA. The bosses, true to the console version, are really hard. The bouncy pads really don't do enough for you in terms of getting height, since your horizontal distance peaks pretty early. Sometimes, even if you do get a butt bounce on the damn guy, it doesn't do anything. I guess that's also true to the console version. So things like eating ghosts and getting token, those are cut. Cut those out, we can't have those. But stupid things like bad hitboxes, yeah, keep those in, we need that. The time trials from the console version return, but this time they're really hard to avoid. I found myself always accidentally grabbing them, and it was kind of an obstacle to avoid not doing them. Ooh! Besides all that, this game really just lacks the variety and substance that Pac Man World 2 on console had. Every level is basically the same, with some minor changes in obstacles and enemy designs. I'll be honest, there's pretty much nothing of value in this game besides the cute graphics, so yeah, I don't recommend this one. Honestly, it has so little to do with Pac Man World 2 that it probably shouldn't have even been in this video. It just shares the name and that's it.
Pac Man World 2 on GBA is like one of the most worthless, bad games that I have ever played in my life. Okay, it's not that bad. I'm kind of over-exaggerating. It's still probably like Sneakers or Sonic 06 or something, but anyways, I'm gonna let this go back to JeffCompass to conclude it. Thanks for having me, asshole.
Thank you, Mr. Shovelware. me. So that's pretty much a wrap on Pac Man World 2. Well, I think the console version's a good game. My continuing thesis that I'll repeat is I just don't think it's as good of a game as people remember it being. I would probably put it over some platformers in this era, but I can't say this game's a masterpiece or anything. It's definitely not a 10 out of 10 or even a 9 or 8. But listen, nostalgia is wonderful. So if you can see the flaws in this game and still have a good memory of it, or even if you don't see the flaws and have a great memory of it, I think that's great. This video is not about crapping on your childhood or anything. So I encourage you and everyone, please have a good time with this game and enjoy it to the best that you can. Because at the end of the day, I want people to enjoy video games. There's tons of charm, there's tons of passion put in, and I still think it's worth buying. It's not like it's some expensive game, it's like $10 on eBay. So go buy it, have a good time. And listen, I'm sure they're gonna remake this game at some point. So if you don't like the flaws in this game, they might be fixed down the line. Pac Man World 2 sold better than 1, so why wouldn't they remake this? Especially capitalizing on our nostalgia. Nostalgia. You know, I'm feeling nostalgic myself to a time when I liked this game more.